Recently, we've been introduced to a series of fabricated characters in media, if you've not been living under a rock for the last 5 years. Two of the most notorious ones that especially have noticed are Graggle Simpson and Team Fortress 2's Madcap. These characters have made it into a public perception in their own respective media, and similarly these two characters specifically blur the line between reality and fiction itself, which could lead to potential audience confusion. When I heard about this particular characters this first time, I came across the idea that I was aware that they didn't even exist before, while they claim to have been there since the inception of the respective media, like The Simpsons or Team Fortress 2. I found it particularly suspicious knowing that I had no memory of these existing back then, and not even as concepts. But this is nothing new. Fiction has affected reality for as long as our reality existed. In the Stone Age, trying to find a rational and scientific explanation to the things going on in our reality was beyond the scope of the limited knowledge of the world humans had back then. So we came up with fiction to somehow sustain this reality as a base explanation. We didn't just come up with folklore, but also mythologies of their own with their own deities, gods, and supernatural beings that for the time being held a basic explanation of the natural occurrences in our lives. Surely often most people can distinguish now between reality and fiction, but that doesn't even mean everybody can, especially if someone lived under a narrative sustaining their views for really long. This is a foundation where religions had stood on for so long, and even today it is still somewhat hard to have people break free from the cognitive bias, or believing an explanation of certain world's phenomena is based on this sort of fiction. Some people even have attempted to blur the line between reality and fiction. In 1938, the book War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells was adapted to a radio show by Orson Welles. The show previously warned about at the very beginning it was fictional, but the news program format it was given, for which most people back then got to listen from, caused a social panic that nearly emulated that sort of panic an alien attack will have on that time. Notably, people's understanding of these things in 1938, let alone in 1930s, was very limited. There was not much fact-checking places or sites, there was no internet, and let alone there were no other more contemporary means of fact-checking. And it was pretty much ripe grounds for propaganda to blur the line between reality and fiction irresponsibly. Given to today's current digital age, with all its too much information going on in social media and in other internet outlets, it's no strange that this phenomenon, where even similar paranoia, dread, or panic can still foster on the minds of humankind today. Notably, the means to tell information from misinformation are more advanced today than before, but we are presented with the problem of behaving a hydra. If you debunk one bit of misinformation, two more pop up in their place. And considering these misinformation bits living within bigger clusters of grander misinformation themes, these days one can debunk one bit, but then put it back on the jar, or put another one in its place in the same jar, or put two. It doesn't matter. The diversity of thought amongst humankind makes this a too complex issue to tackle, at least individually or without the resources to tackle it. But this sort of misinformation effects have been a staple of politics that have been warned about, at least in our public perception of politics. In 1949, George Orwell published his magnum opus 1984 novel, coming at the tail of the end of the World War II and the start of the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, between the West and the East. There's a whole plethora of contemporary influences 1984 was sustained upon, especially given the two factions' power at creating propaganda that still has a huge influence today. The whole setting of 1984, the novel, is set around the dictatorship ambiented in said year, where the Ministry of Truth freely manipulated and bent historical reality itself to further the goals of the ruling political party, the so-called Big Brother or INSOC, two nondescript entities that similarly ruled this dystopian world of Oceania. They could add or remove historical characters out of thin air, as if they either were real or never existed ever, and the common folk believe it as real, since INSOC serves as the main and only authority on the so-called truth. It serves a prime description about the manipulation of truth by those in power. In the political world of these days, It is very common to say misinformation everywhere on the internet, similar to that sort of reality-bending inksock date back in Orwell's world. Things like the current Israel-Palestine conflict in Gaza in 2023 have contesting powers competing to push their narrative, false or not, into the common consciousness. But this manipulation of public perception and distortion of reality is apparently not exclusive to politics, as apparently certain media like TV shows and games are trying to gaslight us into believing their own distorted realities themselves. One such case is the case of Graggle Simpson. Graggle might have been a perfect candidate for the cast of The Simpsons, albeit its oddity, but it was believed to have been there as a main part of The Simpsons cast since its very inception. But this is only a false memory, a deepfake if you will. The real origin of Graggle Simpson was in 2015, where first mentions of him appeared in the Japanese Textport 2 channel, as they attempted to insert a version of the character referred to Nanji Min to screenshots of The Simpsons. Nanji Min obviously being the mascot of the site's live Jupiter board. The earliest mentions of the character in English were in 2021 in 4chan, when a user discussed how the prior aspect of Graggle was intended to be Matt Groening's persona. It only reached virality thanks to social media misinformation in 2022, when seemingly screenshots made in 2 channels started appearing on other sites. Because on that same day in 2021, Simming Jimmy posted a hoax on Twitter. Since then, the hoax was slowly spread all over the internet, especially in 2022. Anyone can similarly pull the same moves on inksock in Orwell's world for an internet funny, and TV shows like The Simpsons are not the only thing that spawns this phenomenon. In Team Fortress 2 recently, there's a sudden appearance of the mysterious character, the Madcap, a supposed 10th class of that never was. The reality of Madcap is that originally it was a workshop entry submitted in May 16th, 2012, which was rejected due to its crude, low-poly, and junky nature. During the 2010s, Madcap was referenced as an in-joke in the TF2 community. A meme of Serta where it was claimed that it was the best cosmetic in existence. Soon thereafter, the meme will be sort of forgotten until for October 4th, 2023, where the meme had its resurgence, only this time as a hoax about the supposed TF2's 10th class. Reddit was soon responsible for gaslighting this character into the collective consciousness of the internet. Oftentimes, case studies like Madcap and Graggle Simpson paint a bigger phenomenon occurring with plenty of other media and historical events as well. It is a phenomenon that plays with the collective memory of society, and it's none other than the Mandela Effect. The Mandela Effect is named after a false memory of South African anti-apartheid activist Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, when he in fact died in 2013. Similar cases of the Mandela Effect have been reported across multiple types of media. One of the most infamous is the Berenstain or Bernstein Bears, but it applies to plenty of other cases too, such as the cornucopia and the Fruit of the Loom logo, or there are even recent attempts at recreating the Mandela Effect, such as Madcap or Graggle Simpson, by the force of sheer reality manipulation through sheer extreme memeing. Repeating a false memory millions of times across a wide range of people, like the case of Madcap or Graggle, can contribute to said collective misremembering and share false memories. But unlike the case of the Fruit of the Loom logo or Nelson Mandela, Madcap and Graggle have been forcefully gaslit into society thanks to the spread they could have on the internet and social media, and the spread of misinformation. Gaslighting is a form of coercive control historically referred to extreme psychological manipulation, usually to cause a forced mental illness in order to brainwash a person. In today's language, it is the experience of someone's reality being repeatedly questioned by another, deceiving one's memory, perception of reality, or mental stability. It could be easily dismissed as a trendy buzzword wrongfully used to refer to mere misagreements, but it can't be denied that it is often a form of psychological abuse, often perpetrated by people with higher power than others, and oftentimes it has been used even by higher powers, given to the current nature of consent manufacturing, and even how the US spreads its propaganda worldwide. One case example of gaslighting can be referred by American journalists to the actions of Donald Trump during the 2016 presidential election and his term as a president, where Trump's narrative constantly questions his opponent's sanity or perception of reality, often as a form of political abuse. If it can end up with dictators like Trump gaslighting his opponents with false narratives, then what is the excuse to question everyone's sanity and gaslight everyone with cases like Madcap and Graggle Simpson? The The fun and comedy might just be the beginning of all these things. For sure, it surely is funny at first, but given what we've already discussed, the implication of the internet pushing false narratives or half-truths online, like we discussed in the PlayStation Startup Sound video, doesn't it seem a bit too much when there are active misinformation campaigns going on the internet, especially with international conflicts and such? Perhaps we're directly or indirectly responsible of being our own ministry of truth, like in Orwell's work, and it's easier to manipulate and distort facts into fiction this much, but there must be a responsibility of having a need of transparency and clarity from people online when presenting content that can potentially blur the lines between reality and fiction. As we know it, the internet is becoming more and more as an unreliable source of information, not just for corporate interests, but also because of the ignorance of its consumers. Because the last thing we want to create is an Orwellian dystopia like 1984, even for a meme.
During times of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act.